We're at 9:30. We're going to crack our knuckles, do a little stretching. Everybody take a breath. I'm wearing my party tie, so I'm in an upbeat mood, or trying to be, a difficult time. Carol, will you give us a page number and an instruction?
Okay. Page 65, everybody rise.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lech v'vina le'avchim ben yom u'ben layla. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shasani b'tzalmo. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shasani Yisrael. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shasani ben chorin. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam p'gokeach ivrim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam mabish arumim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam matir asurim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Sokef Kefufim, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, Baruch ha'aretz al hamayim, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, Asali kol tzorkihi, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, Hamechim mitzadei gaver, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, Ozei Yisrael b'gvura, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, Ozei Yisrael b'tifara, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, Hanoten layahayev koha.
You may be seated.
Udnenu alhamu b'chol yom l'chenu chesed urachamim beinecha v'nei kol ra'enu v'tigmalenu chasadim tovim Baruch atah Adonai gomel chasadim tovim le'amo Yisrael Yehi ratzon milfanecha Adonai Elohai v'Elohei avotam v'imotam. Ashrenu ma tov chelkenu ma na'im go'alenu ma yafe Yerushatenu Ashrenu shanachnu mashkimim u'ma'arivim erev v'boker v'omrim pamayim b'chol yom Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad Baruch Shem kavod malchuto le'olam va'ed Atahu Hashem Kahadesh et Shemcha Amaktashe Shemecha v'kadesh et Shemcha b'olamecha V'shuatcha tarim v'tagbi arkanenu Baruch atah Adonai Mekadesh et Shimcha b'harabim.
Service will continue on the top of page 81.
Mizmor shir Chanukat habayit l'David. Hafakta misvidi l'macholi, pitata saki v'tazreni simcha, l'man yizamrecha kavod v'lo yidom Adonai Elohai, le'olam hodeka. Warner's Kaddish, page 82. For those reciting, you're welcome to unmute and recite along with me. Yigadal v'yikadash shemei rabbah, v'yalma divra kirute v'yamlich malchute, v'chayechon uv'yomechon uv'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael, Ba'agala uvizman kari v'imru amen. Yehi shmei rabba mevarach le'olam ulamei amaya. Yibarach v'yishtabach v'yipa'ar v'yitromam v'yinaseh. V'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitalal shmei d'kudesha brichu. Le'ela min kol berchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata. La'amiran v'alma v'imru. Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen.
You may rise as we continue on the top of page 83.
Baruch Shamar v'haya olam, Baruch hu, Baruch oseh v'reishit, Baruch omer ve'oseh, Baruch gozer u'mekayim, Baruch merachem al haaretz, Baruch merachem al habriot, Baruch meshalem sachar tov lire'ah, Baruch ha'la'ad v'kayam la'netzach, Baruch bodeh u'matzil, Baruch shemo, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Yahachid ke'olamim, melech meshubach, umfer adei ad shemo hagadol, Baruch atah Adonai, melech mehulal batishbachot.
You may be seated, page 84.
Hodu l'Adonai. Ki kol Elohei amim elilim, v'Adonai shamayim asa. Hod v'hadar lefanav. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu, v'yishtachavu l'har kodsho, ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu, v'churachim yechaper. Adonai tzvot asher adam boteach bach, Adonai Hashem Eloheinu anenu v'yom kareinu, hoshia et amecha. ואני בחסדך בטחתי, יגל ליבי וישועתך, אשר על אדוני כי גמל עלי.
Our service will continue on the top of page 91.
Hallelujah, hallelujah, et Shem Adonai, hallelujah, et Adonai. Beit Yisrael baruchu et Adonai, Beit Aharon baruchu et Adonai, Beit HaLevi baruchu et Adonai, Yirei Adonai baruchu et Adonai, Baruch Adonai Mitzion Shochein Yerushalayim, hallelujah.
You may rise as we continue on the top of page 92.
Hodu l'Adonai ki tov, ki le'olam chasto. Noten lechem l'chol basar ki le'olam chasto, hodu le'el hashamayim ki le'olam chasto.
You may be seated, page 93.
Vanenu tzadikim b'Adonai l'sharim navatihilah. Nahashenu chikta l'Adonai ezreinu maginam hu, כי בו ישמח ליבנו כי בשם קודשו בטחנו, יהי חסדך אדוני עלינו כאשר יכהנו לך, מזמור שיר ליום השבת טוב להודות לאדוני. ודינוהם בשיבה, דשנים ורעננים יהיו, להגיד כי ישר אדוני, צורי ולא עוולה בו. אדוני מלך אהוד לבש. עדותיך ננועות לביתך נאווה קודש אדוני לאורך ימים. והוא רחום יכפר עוון ולא ישחית, וירבה להשיב אפו, ולא יאיר כל חמתו, אדוני השם אלוהינו ביום קראנו. אשרי יושבי ביתך, הודו לך סלה. תהילת אדוני ידבר פיו, ויברך כל בשר שם קודשו לעולם ועד, ואנחנו נברך ים מעתה ועד עולם, הללויה, הללויה. אדוני שומר את גרים, יתום ואלמנה, יודד בדרך רשעים יאבד, ימלוך אדוני לעולם אלוהי ציון לדור ודור, הללויה. הללויה כי טוב זמרה אלוהינו. מגיד הרב ליעקב, חוקיו ומשפטיו לישראל, לא עשה כן לכל גוי, ומשפטים בל ידעום, הללויה. הללויה, הללו את אדוני מן השמיים, הללוהו במרומים. וירם קרן לעמו, תהילה לכל חסידיו, לבני ישראל עם קרובו, הללויה.
Page 100.
הללויה, שירו לאדוני שיר חדש. לאסור מלכיכם בזיקים ונכבדיהם בחבלי ברזל, לעשות בהם משפט כתוב, הדר הוא לכל חסידיו, הללויה, 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 הללו אל בקודשו, הללו, הללו, בצלצלי שמע, הללו, הללו, בצלצלי תרועה, כל הנשמה תהלל יה, הללויה, הללויה, Kol hanshama tehallel. Hallelujah. Baruch Adonai Elohim. Baruch Adonai Elohim Elohei Yisrael, Osei niflo levado, Baruch Shem kavodo leolam, v'yimalei kavod et kol haaretz, amen v'amen.
We rise as we continue on the top of page 101.
Vayevarech David et Atahu Adonai Elohim, Asher bacharta be'Avraham, v'hotzeito me'ur kasdim, v'samta shemo Avraham, u'matzata et levavo, ne'aman lefanecha. Hayam bakata lifnehem, v'yavru b'toch hayam v'yabasha, v'et rodfehem, hishlachta b'mtzolot, k'mo even b'mayim azim. V'yosha Adonai. Vayar Yisrael et hayad hagedola, asher asa Adonai b'mitzrayim, v'yir'u ha'am et Adonai, v'yaminu b'Adonai v'Moshe avdo, az yashir Moshe u'vnei Yisrael et Hashem. Adonai yimloch leolam va'ed, Adonai yimloch leolam va'ed. Ki l'Adonai hamlucha u'moshel b'goyim, v'alu mosheim b'har Tzion lishpot et har Esav, v'hayeta l'Adonai hamlucha, v'haya Adonai l'melech kol haaretz, v'yom hahu yeh Adonai echad u'shemo echad.
You may be seated as we continue on the top of page 104.
Nishmat kol chai, Tvarech et shimcha Adonai Eloheinu.
Ask me if I want to.
V'halechan shabecha unfarechacha, unfarech et shem kodshecha, ka'amur leDavid. Baruchi nafshi et Adonai, v'chol kravai et shem kodsho. Ha'el b'tatzumot uzecha, hagadol b'chvod shemecha, hagibor la'netzach v'hanora b'norotecha, hamelech hayoshev al kisei ram v'nisa. Middle of page 105. We're so lucky to have such outstanding davening, uplifting the congregation. We thank everyone who's participated in the service so far, and we continue Shochin Ad Marom, page 105.
Shochin Ad Marom v'kadosh shemo.
Shochin Ad Marom v'kadosh shemo. Kaduvers.
Befi Yesharim tithalal, v'divrei tzadikim titbarach, v'b'lashon chasidim titramam, v'b'kerav kedoshim titkadosh,
U'machalot revavot amcha beit Yisrael.
Lehotot lehalel, l'shabech lepoer, לרומם להדר לברך להלל קלס, על כל דברי שירת בתשבחות, דוד בן ישי עבדך משיחך, ישתבח שמך לעד מלכנו. ברכות והודעות מעתה ועד עולם, ברוך אתה אדוני, אל מלך גדול בתשבחות, אל ההודות אדוני נפלאות, הבוחר בשירי זמרה את מלך אלפי העולמים. יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה, ילמד דברי קירותי וימליך מלכותי, בחייך וביומך ובחיי בכל בית ישראל, בגלה בזמן קריב ועמהו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מבורך לעולם ולעולמיה, יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי דקדשה לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה. תושבחתה ונחמתה, תמירן בימה ויאמרו אמן. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, יוצר אור ובורא חושך, עושה שלום ובורא את הכל. הכל יודוך והכל ישבחוך.
Service continues in the middle to the bottom of 107 as we prepare to sing together with Beth on page 108.
אין כרך אדוני אלוהינו בעולם הזה, ואין זולתך מלכנו לחיי העולם הבא, אפס בלתך גואלנו לימות המשיח, ואין המלך מושיענו לתחיות המתים. אל אדון על כל המעשים ברוך ומבורך, בפי כל נשמה גדלו וטובו, מלא עולם דעת ותבונה, סובבים אותו. המתגאה על חיות הקודש, ונדר וכבוד, על המרכבה, זכות ומישור, לפני כיסו, חסד ורחמים לפני כבודו. טובים מאורות שברא אלוהינו יצרם, בדעת, בבינה ובהשכל, כוח וגבורה, נתן בהם להיות מושלים בקרב תבל, מלאים זיו ומפיקים נוגה, נאדירם בכל העולם, שמחים בצאתם וששים בבואם, עושים בהמה רצון קונם, פאר וכבוד נותנים לשמות, צהלה ורינה לזכר מלכותו, קרא לשמש ויזרח אורה והתקין צורת הלבנה, שבח נותנים לו כל צבא מערב, תפארת וגדולה, צרפים ואופנים בחיות הקודש. לאל אשר שבת מכל המעשים. תתברך צורנו מלכנו וגואלנו. כולם אהובים, כולם ברורים, כולם גיבורים וכולם עושים באמה וברצון קונם, וכולם פותחים את פיהם בקדושה וטהרה, בשירה ובזמרה, ומברכים ומשבחים ומפארים ומעריצים ומקדישים וממליכים את שם האל המלך הגדול. להקדיש לראות רם בנחת רוח, בשפה ברורה ונעימה, קדושה כולם כאחד עונים ואומרים ביראה. קדוש, 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 אדוני צבאות, מלוא כל הארץ כבודו. ואופנים וחיות הקודש, ברעש גדול מנסים למצרפים, לעומתם משבחים ואומרים, ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקומו, לאל ברוך נמות איתנו. אור חדש על ציון תאיר, ונזכה כולנו מהרה לאורו. ברוך אתה אדוני יוצר המאורות.
Amen.
אהבה רבה אהבתנו.
Continue the service on page 111 as we prepare for the Shema on the following page.
והאר עינינו בתורתך, ותאבק ליבנו במצוותיך, ויחד לבבינו לאהבה וליראה את שמך, ולא נבוש לעולם ועד, ולא נבוש לעולם ועד, כי בשם קודשך הגדול הנורא בטחנו נגילה ונשמחה, נגילה ונשמחה בישועתך. והביאנו לשלום מארבע כנפות הארץ, ותוליכנו קוממיות, קוממיות לארצנו. כי אל פועל ישועת אתה, ובנו בחרת מכל עם ולשון, וקרבתנו לשמך הגדול. הגדול סלע באמת להודות לך, ויחדך באהבה. ברוך אתה אדוני, הבוחר בעמו ישראל באהבה. שמע ישראל, אדוני אלוהינו, אדוני אחד. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודך, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבבך, ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובמלאכתך בדרך ושכבך ובקומך וקשרתם לאות על ידך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובישעריך.
We continue silently, middle of 112 through 113.
Adonai Elohechem Melech. לדור ודור הוא קיים ושמו קיים, וכיסו נכון, ומלכותו באמונתו לעד קיימת. האמת שאתה הוא אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו, מלכנו מלך אבותינו, גואלנו גואל אבותינו, יוצרנו צור ישועתנו, פודנו ומצילנו מעולם שמך, אין אלוהים זולתך. עזרת אבותינו אתה הוא מעולם.
As we work our way down page 114, we'll be standing for the final 3 lines and then following the instructions to go directly into our silent Shacharit Amidah.
תהילת לאל עליון, ברוך הוא ומבורך, משה ובני ישראל לך אנו שירה, בשמחה רבה ויאמרו כולם, מי כמוך באלים אדוני, מי כמוך נדר בקודש, נורא תהילות, אוסף אלה. שירה חדשה שיבחו גאולים, לשמך אספת הים, יחד כולם הודו להמלכו ואמרו, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. צור ישראל, קומה בעזרת ישראל, ובדחנו ממך, יהודה וישראל. גואלנו, אדוני צבאות שמו, קדוש ישראל. ברוך אתה אדוני, כל ישראל.
Amen.
For those still davening, please mute us until you're finished, as the rest of us return to 115b for the repetition.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu v'Elohei Avotenu, Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzchak, v'Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, v'Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol, Hagibor v'Hanora, El Elyon, v'Omel Chasadim Tovim, v'Koneh Hakol, v'Zocher Chasdei Avot, ומביא גואל לבני בניהם למען שמו יהבה. מלך עוזר פוקד ומושיע ומגן, ברוך אתה אדוני, מגן אברהם ופוקד שרה.
Amen.
אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני, מחיי מתים אתה רב להושיע, משיב הרוח ומוריד הגשם, מכלכל חיים בחסד, מחיי מתים ברחמים רבים, סומך נופלים ורופא חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר. מי כמוך בעל גבורות, ומידו מלך, מלך ממית ומחיה, ומצמיח ישועה. ונאמן אתה לך חיות מתים, ברוך אתה אדוני, המחיה המתים. אתה קדוש ושמך קדוש, וקודשים בכל יום ובהללוך הסלה. ברוך אתה אדוני, האל הקדוש.
We continue on page 117.
ישמח משה במתנת חלקו, כי עבד נאמן קראת לו. גליל תפארת בראשו נתת, ועמדו לפניך על הר סיני. ושני לוחות אבנים הוריד בידו, וכתוב בהם שמירת שבת, וכתוב בהם שמירת שבת. וכן כתוב בתורתך, ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם, ביני ובין בני ישראל עוד היא לעולם. כי 6 ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ, וביום השביעי שבת ויהי נפש. ולא נתתו אדוני אלוהינו לגויי הארצות, ולא הנחלתו מלכנו לעובדי פסילים. וגם במנוחתו לא ישכנו ערלים, כי אל ישראל עמך נתתו באהבה, לזרע יעקב אשר בם בחרת, עם מקדשי שביעי, כולם ישבעו, ויתענגו מטובך. והשביעי רצית בו וקידשתו, חמדת ימים אותו קראת, זכר למעשה בראשית. אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו, רצה במנוחתנו, קדשנו במצוותיך, ותן חלקנו בתורתך. סבנו מטובך, ושמחנו ישועתך. וטהר ליבנו לעבדך באמת, והנחילנו אדוני אלוהינו באהבה וברצון, שבת קודשך וינוחו בישראל, מקדשי שמך. V'tzei Adonai Eloheinu b'yamacha Yisrael u'v'tefilatam v'chashev et havodah lidbir beitecha v'tefilatam b'ahavat tekabel b'ratzon v'tehil ratzon tamid avodat Yisrael amacha v'techazena einenu b'shuvacha l'tzion b'rachamim baruch atah Adonai המחזיר שכינתו לציון, מודים אנחנו לך. הטוב כי לא חלו רחמך, והמרחם כי לא תמו חסדיך, מעולם קיווינו לך. ועל כולם יתברך ויתרומם שמך מלכנו תמיד לעולם ועד. וכל חיים יודוך סלע והללו את שמך באמת האל ישועתנו ועזרתנו סלע ברוך אתה אדוני הטוב שמך ולחנה להודות אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו ברכנו בברכה המשולשת בתורה הכתובה על ידי משה עבדך האמורה מפי אחרון ובניו כהנים עם קדושך כאמור יברך אדוני וישמרך
יהי רצון
יאר אדוני פניו אליך ויחונך
יהי
יישא
רצון
אדוני פניו אליך וישם לך שלום
יהי רצון
שים שלום טובה וברכה, הן בחסד ורחמים עלינו ועל כל ישראל. עמך ברכנו אבינו כולנו כאחד מאור פניך כי באור פניך נתת לנו אדוני אלוהינו תורת חיים ואהבת חסד יהבת חסד וצדקה וברכה ורחמים וחיים ורחמים וחיים ושלום וטוב בעיניך לברך את עמך ישראל בכל עת ובכל שעה בשלומך ברוך אתה אדוני מברך את עמו ישראל בשלום.
Amen. Page 138.
יקדש ויקדש שמי רבה
אמן
יעמד דברי קירותי וימלך מלכותי וחייכון ויומכון וחיי כל בית ישראל בעגלה ובזמן קריב ויאמרו אמן יהי שמי רבה מבורך לעולם עולם מעלמיה יתברך יפרח וישתבח ויפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי דקודשה
בריחו
לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תשבחתה ונחמתה דמירן מימה ויאמרו
אמן
תתקבל צלות כל ובכל דכל ישראל קדמה וכל דבשמיה ויאמרו
אמן
יהי שלמה רבה מן שמיה וחיים עלינו ויעל כל ישראל ויאמרו
אמן
הוא עושה שלום במרומיו הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ויאמרו Amen.
We turn back to page 72 for the Psalm for Shabbat.
היום יום שבת קודש. Sadikatamar Yifra Ke'eres Bavanon Yizkeh Shetuli Beveit Adonai Bechatzrot Eloheinu Yafrihu Od Yanuvun B'Seva L'Shenim V'Rananim Yiyu L'Chagi Ki Yashar Adonai Tzuri V'Lo Avlatabo.
Yishar Kochech, right? I should say Yishar Kochechem. As we turn to page 82 for the Mourner's Kaddish. Those who are reciting are invited to rise and recite along with me. Yigadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, v'yalma divra kirutei v'yamlich malchutei, v'chayechon yomechon uv'chayei dechol beit Yisrael, ba'agala uv'izman kari v'imru. Amen. Yehi shmei Rabbah mevarach le'olam amei amaya. Yivarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitomam v'yinaseh v'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitalal shmei kedusha brichu le'ela min kol berchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata da'amiran v'ama v'imru. Amen. Yehi shlama Rabbah min shemaya v'chayim aleinu kol Yisrael v'imru. Amen. Oseh shalom hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru.
Amen.
May their memories continue to bring blessings to this world. Shabbat shalom, everybody. Thanks for joining us. It is a beautiful day. I hope you have a window nearby that you can let the light in and get your vitamin D. Today, we are arriving here at the entryway to Shabbat Zachor and of course, Parashat Truma. There are many parallels between the beginning of Genesis and the creation of the cosmos, and here the initial instructions for the creation of the tabernacle. I could rehearse many, but a few that come to mind are the branches of the menorah, because it looks like tree branches, as one of the trees in the Garden of Eden. Another is the cherubim who guard the entrance to the Garden of Eden, and I'll be talking about them in the Devar Torah. And another is just the very idea that before creation happens, one should have a blueprint. For those who are in the Tian Torah course, and we spent a lot of the first session just looking at the profundity of that idea and its influence really as a foundation of Jewish thinking. Because for the rabbis, they see this as in Genesis as well, that the creation happened according to the blueprint, which is Torah itself. And therefore, it's not that God necessarily acts individually in the world to make everything happen, but everything happens according to the laws of the universe, according to the science and the structure, because the Torah is an image of a logos, of a blueprint for everything there is. And here we begin in Truma with the blueprint of the tabernacle. It's a lesson to all of us who try to build anything in our lives, whether it's a company, a synagogue, a nonprofit, or a home, that without a plan, without a blueprint, things can easily go astray. Remember, we're not building anything yet. We're just in the patience of the period of the blueprint. And we'll be heading into that shortly with chapter 26 of Exodus. And we'll start in verse 1. We're in the middle shlish. And before we get to that, let's dedicate our Torah study today to all of those in need of healing. This is a dedication that needs to continue and be remembered every week. So I'll do the Mishaberach now. I'm going to read the names on the list. I know it's long and we care about each and every one. Each of them is counted. And you're welcome also to say names out loud when I wave my hand, as well as put names in the chat area, and I'll do my best to read them as accurately as I can. Let's dedicate today's Torah study to those in need of healing. Misha Berach Avoteinu Avraham Yitzchak v'Yaakov Sarah Rivka Rachel v'Leah Hu Yivarech v'Yirapeh et HaCholim Yerushalma ben Avraham Yitzchak Mayim Shir B'Chaya Elisheva Ophir Kudas Kedi Zucker David ben Avraham Gloria Tzvia Bat Ruvainu Devora Miriam Tzipora Bat Yosef Zelda Stacy Simpson Duke Shlomi Yonah Bat Avram Hal Rothbard Gedol Henya Bat Shangel Sprenza Yonah Moshe ben Shoshana Vali Sorachana bat Shalom Mikhael v'Chaya Fega, Shlomo Hill ben Hershel v'Shenyala, Shoshana bat Chedve, Eliezer Yehuda ben Zora Motel, Alana Shat, Shmuel ben Yitzchak v'Yidit, Chavalea bat Golda, Rachel v'Chava, Mikael ben Shaul v'Tzipora, Dan Yitzchak ben Ruven Avram v'Leah, Arizelek ben Devora, David ben Malka, Yonatan bar Rafael v'Laila, Hanan de bar Moshe v'Brena, Yochana bat Hershel, Devora bat Yehudit, Shoshana bat Tova, Mikael ben Lemen v'Chana, Avraham Dov ben Moshe Cohen, Liba, Eliezer ben Benjamin, Miriam Ruth bat Avram v'Sarah, Rivka bat Avram Meir, Richard Levy, Moshe David, Bronya Rumble, Benny Borges, Michal Dana Leah bat Elamira, Joseph Lely, Miriam bat Benzion v'Esther, Amy Cox, Zachariah Mitan ben Vardalea, Sima Leah bat Ruben v'Fegela, Kobe Bergman, Esther bat Avram v'Sarah, Sanford Flair, Bachman ben Chana Rezo, Alex Dombrowski, Sima bat Rivka, William Bishop, Ashley Montgomery, Avram Gershon, Ben Moshe, Herzvi, Ben Ruchel v'Shimon, Cornelius Barbara, Benjamin Yisrael, Ben Chanita, Eliezer ben Benjamin, Phyllis Werbel, Deborah Salzberg, Reuben ben Chanalea, Robin Greenspan, Harav Shrava Yosef ben Rezold, Chaim Noach ben Leah v'Aharon, Shmuel Chazkel ben Eliyahu Victor v'Chana, Dor Viva ben Yitzchak v'Esther, Reuven ben Shmuel Simcha, Leanne Reams, Warren Greenberg, Michal Lev ben Tzipora, Jennifer Yuda Schwartz, Carol Koladzi, Olivia Ruta, Lily Sukenik, Yehuda Aharon ben Eliezer v'Tzipora, Muriel Gluckman, Shlomi bat Sharon, Naomi Chaya bat Shlomit, Yitzchak ben Benjamin v'Malka, Shane Rivka bat Esther Rochel, Benjamin Chaim ben Arya, Bennett Stahark, Sam Warner, Attica Shinover, Dvor Viva Yitzchak v'Esther, Beth Jarvis, Eileen Berherk, Aaron ben Eliashiv v'Mikael, Moshe Chanach ben Akiva v'Toba Freda, Yafe Lana, bat Tzipor Esther v'Baruch Simcha, Miriam Chana bat Shlomit, Leah Hadassah bat Shlomit, Samantha Tenlanges, Tzviat Zara bat Armed Nachama, Eliezer Moshe ben Mira, Kela bat Edna, Natalia bat Moshe ben Leah, Zarivka bat Kuna, Simcha bat Leah, Shmuel ben Yoah, Moshe Chanach ben Toba Freda, Vera bat Itka, all those suffering from the coronavirus, V'ehet.
Yora Miriam bat Esther.
Edie Ann Kirk Myers,
Yerachmiel Shimon ben Sarah.
Nell Stern, Riva Bornstein,
Edamaka bat Chaya, Maurice Restivo, Mickey Winokur, Tom Goldblatt, Brother Ed Mohar, Barry Breen, Judith Kaminsky, Kim Harmon, Melissa Larson, the entire Cargill family, Yitzchak ben Olga, David Bahal, Elena Blahik, Rachel Tzipor bat Chaya Basha, Kabla Lesage, Sarah and Eva Webster, Jane and Joe Gunsberg, Trisha Blahik, Jeheb Kihiv, Bob Rahin, Elaine Bohide, Stuart Hurwitz, Alan Frank, Madge Clays, Marion and Dorothy Hartman, Lori Russell, Nolan Dudsas, Elsie Stern, Riva Bornstein, V'ehet. V'kol hacholim b'gila kedosha hakadosh baruch hu yimalei rachamim aleihem lehachzikam rapotam v'yishlach lahem mehera refuah shlema min hashamayim refuah hanefesh refuah haguf b'toch sharchalei Yisrael shabbati mizocher f'rakava lavo hashta b'agalav izman kariv v'nomahar amen. We dedicated our Torah study today, our Shabbat, to their healing and to everyone's healing who dwell on this earth. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Our first Torah, we are on page 491 in the Eitz Chaim Chumash. I'll also put chapter 26 of Shemot on the screen. And as I do so, Josh Bender is our first reader this morning.
ואת המשכן תעשה יריעות שש משזה ותכלת בארגמן ותולת שני קירובים מעשה חושך תעשה אותם אורך הריית האחת 28 באמה ורוחב 4 באמה היריעה האחת מידת אחת לכל היריעות ו5 היריעות תהיינה חוברות אישה אל אחותה ו5 יריעות חוברות אישה אל אחותה ועשית לולות תכלה על שפת היריעה האחת יקצה בחוברת וכן תעשה בשפת היריעה הקיצונה במחברת השנית 50 לולאות תעשה ביריעה האחת ו50 לולאות תעשה בקצה היריעה אשר במחברת השנית מקבילות הלולאות אישה אל אחותה ועשית 50 קרסי זהב והרבעת את היריעות אישה אל אחותה בקרסים והיה המשכן אחד.
Yishar Koch, Josh, thank you for our initial reading as Levana unmutes herself and continues with verse 7, which can be found on page 492 of the Chumash.
ועשית יריעות עזים לאוהל על המשכן, 12 יריעות תעשה אותם, אורך היריעה אחת 30 באמה, ורוחב 4 באמה, היריעה אחת מידה אחת ל12 יריעות, וחיברת את 5 היריעות לבד, ואת 6 היריעות לבד, וכפלת את היריעה השישית אל מול פני האוהל, ועשית 50 לולאות על שפת היריעה האחת הקיצונה בחוברת, ו50 לולאות על שפת היריעה החוברת השנית, ועשית קרסי נחושת 50, והבאת את הקרסים והלולאות, וחיברת את האוהל, והיה אחד.
Yishar Kochech, Levana, thank you so much for reading. I enjoy, I sometimes tell the story, I'll be very, very quick, which is just that I was so embarrassed most of my life in Ulpan and elsewhere by my American accent in Hebrew. And it made me very, very, very self-conscious. And I didn't feel comfortable taking on an Israeli accent as an American. And I had this absolutely wonderful Hebrew teacher after so many years of studying Hebrew, Noga. And Noga said, Nadav, you speak Hebrew in your voice. That's the voice I want to hear, not someone else's. And Levana, when you chant, and I hear each of you who chant, like in your voice. What she was saying to me, I hear in you. I hear Torah in your voice. And Levana, when you specifically do it, I feel like you're talking to me. So I just wanted to tell you, there's something about the way you read and chant that I feel like you're just like, we're standing at Kiddush and you're just speaking Torah to me. And I enjoy it. So each of you, I may not say something about everyone today, but when I'm listening to you, each of you, I hear that special voice and Torah coming out of your mouth and from your authentic voice that God gave you. Speaking of voices, and a beautiful one at that, Laurel Federbush. Laurel will unmute herself. We're on 493, the Eitz Chaim, picking up with verse 12.
Okay. V'serach ha'odef biriot ha'ohel chatzi ha'yeriot ha'odefet tisrach al achorei hamishkan v'ha'ama mizeh v'ha'ama mizeh ba'odef ba'orech yeriot ha'ohel Yesaruach al tzidei hamishkan mizeh umizeh lechasoto va'asita michseh la'ohel orot elim ma'adamim umichseh orot techashim milmala.
Thank you for the delivery of the dolphin skins, Laurel. It's always a highlight of the reading. We continue with verse 15 and Paul Levine, page 493 in the Chumash.
Atzitat karshim l'mishkan, atzes shitim ondim, eser amot orech hakaresh, v'ama v'chatzi hama rachav keresh hachad, shte yadot lakeresh hachad, mishulavot yisha el achotah, Ken taseh lechol karshei hamishkan, v'asitet hakarshim lemishkan, esrim keresh dikva temena, arba'im ane kesev taseh tachat esrim hakaresh shnei adanim Tachad hakeresh hachad l'shtei adotav v'shnei adanim Tachad hakeresh hachad l'shtei adotav u'letzela hamishkan hasheni lifat tzafon esrim karesh arba'im adnehem kasev shnei adanim Tachat hakeresh hachad, u'shnei adanim, tachat hakeresh hachad.
And Paul, thank you for reading that. I apologize to everyone who is having flashbacks to their shoulder or hip surgeries with all the talk of sockets. And we continue with verse 22, and Sue Cowan takes on the read. And Sue, I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself.
Ulyarkete hamishkan yama tase shisha krashim ushne krashim tase limkut sohot hamishkan vayarchatayim v'yiyut Toamim milmata kiakda Yehutamim al rosho el hatabat ha'echad kehen yeh lishnehem miktsot yuhu V'hayu shmona krashim va'adnehem kesev shisha asar adanim shnei adanim tachat hakeresh hachad u'shnei adanim Tachat hakeresh ha'echad.
Beautiful reading. Yashar kochek, Sue. And Sue, I know we usually say B'Sha'ah Tovah for other reasons. May things happen at the right time. But I say B'Sha'ah to you on moving to Ann Arbor at the right time. I know your plans were quite spoiled by pandemic, and we're so happy to have you from afar. And we look forward to continuing to do so. And B'Sha'ah Tovah, may the time be right when you're with us in person, and we can be with you in person. Mark Daskin continues the read for Shvi'i. We're at Exodus 26, verse 26, page 494 in the Chumash, as we continue.
ועשית בריחים עצי שיטים 5 לקרשי צלע המשכן האחד וחמישה בריחים לקרשי צלע המשכן השני ו5 בריחים לקרשי צלע המשכן לארבעתיים ימה והבריח התיכון בתוך הקרשים מבריח מן הקצה לקצה ואת הקרשים תצפה זהב, ואת אבותיהם תעשה זהב, בתים לבריחים, וציווית את הבריחים זהב, והקיימות את המשכן כמשפטו, אשר הרית בהר.
Yashar Koach. We're getting ready to continue with our next reading. Before we do so, I ask you to turn, if you're in the Chumash, to page 1135, as we're going almost to the end of the Torah for the special reading for Shabbat Zachor, some of the verses about Amalek and the cause of evil, meaning what Amalek symbolizes and embodied, which we will be remembering, of course, on Purim coming up later this week, and the Haftarah will also reflect today's special theme. Before we read those verses, I want to share a brief reflection. It's hard on Shabbat. The whole pandemic is hard because there's such important issues that have arisen from the pandemic, and we have to balance what it is that we can take with not neglecting the opportunity to see Torah in front of us. So I hope you'll forgive me by introducing a challenging note at this time, but part of what happens with the idea of evil being in those in the stragglers who are preyed upon in this world, and the question raised in Torah and by the rabbis that we all know, which is, why are they stragglers in the first place? So of course, those who prey on the stragglers in society embody evil. But is there a way that we facilitate it sometimes without intention? We're in a very interesting point right now in this year of pandemic and this year of Torah with vaccine inoculation. Yes, not enough vaccine has been provided by our leaders up until this point, although we're grateful for the millions of doses that do exist. And we are witnessing that there are stragglers in the pandemic. We all know the communities of color are affected by mortality and death more than others, but this is not to discount our own losses. In no way does it mean to do that. But how can I put this? If the Torah was reminding us last week that at Sinai we feel the moral and conscience demand of the Ten Commandments, but we don't necessarily feel it when we're thinking, well, should one encounter someone who's poor, don't take their garment in pledge, but make sure they get to sleep in it. I'm not sure I know any people in that position, but if it comes up, I'm sure someone will take care of it. Or the demands of animals, the demands of property, the demands of the environment, things that are those things for us gemilut chasadim, acts of loving kindness, or are they mitzvah? Is it commanded? Do we feel the commandedness of things that we could put out of our mind? And in some ways, isn't that the leaders in the march of the Israelites? It's not that they're intentionally leaving people behind. It's just that they're like, well, I'm sure there are people taking care of those people, but I mean, we're escaping too, and we have our own problems, and we're on our march as well. We have our job to do. The distribution of vaccines raises a troubling point at this time. It is uncomfortable to talk about because we all know people, and we count ourselves among them, some of us, who have found ways to get the vaccine, even if perhaps, or for those we know, even if perhaps we are not clearly listed as it being our turn. And this is not to fault anyone who seeks to protect their own health and protect the health of others. But aren't we in a situation right now mirrored in the Torah? We have a long waiting line, and there are people at the back who have been suffering. And somehow there are also people along the way who maybe found a way through someone they know, or through just in some ways the privilege of understanding loopholes and understanding how the system works and having people explain it to them to know how to move farther forward in the line. I don't mean to shame anybody who has found a way to get the vaccine. But as we have long lines waiting to be saved, it seems appropriate to mention the question raised on this Shabbat Zachor of, are we looking behind at the stragglers and making sure they get what they need, or do we leave them on some level to fend for themselves because out of sight, out of mind? We continue with Mark reading those verses, and Mark, just give me a second to put them on the screen. We're in Deuteronomy, there we go. We're in Deuteronomy chapter 25, verse 17.
Zachor et asher asalecha Amalek b'derech b'tzeichem miMitzrayim asher karcha b'derech v'yizaneh b'cha kol hanefesh alim acharecha v'ata yifyageh v'lo yarei Elohim v'haya v'haniach Adonai Elohecha lecha mikol oivecha misaviv ba'aretz asher Adonai Elohecha notein lecha nachala l'risha timchet sefer Amalek mitachat hashamayim lo tishkach.
Yeshar Koach, Mark. Thank you so much for such a strong read. As we prepare for the Haftarah for Shabbat Zachor, you're going to be finding it all the way at the back of the Chumash on page 1281, the Haftarah for Shabbat Zachor. And Babette is our reader for the Haftarah today. Before we do so, I just want to introduce it briefly. And here we go. As all of you know, I am a great apologist for the Torah. I love charitable reading of all of Tanakh. I mean, I want to be disturbed by it, but I want to find the good in it. But it is hard not to be horrified by the Haftarah we read every year here for Shabbat Zachor. It is, of course, the Haftarah where Saul fails God for not completely destroying, genociding the Amalekites. For Saul has not killed the king Agag, their king, and has not killed their cattle. And Samuel takes Saul to task and slays Agag himself. We read this before Purim, of course, because we traditionally consider Mordechai and Esther to be descendants of Saul, Haman a direct descendant of Agag, he's an Agagite. And so Mordechai and the Jews engage in a bloodbath at the end of the Megillah to make up for Saul's failure. Of course, this Haftarah is especially disturbing. Why does one have to do a complete annihilation where almost everything has been destroyed, even cattle? Why can't one declare success, allow the defeated to live under your rule with reconciliation, and let soldiers go home? While there are parts of this that I don't mean to excuse at all, I just want to continue to live with the discomfort of it, and that's okay too. Nevertheless, especially with time to reflect this year on what is happening in our country, the Jew who thought, and I was that Jew, who thought that 30 years ago, and even 20 years ago, I would say even maybe 10 years ago, I thought a certain thing about how one needs to move on and allow for reconciliation and the fight to end. I was the Jew who used to watch Westerns and Civil War movies, who used to think the music comes on at the end, the battle is over, let the Confederates go home to lick their wounds, while the slaves slowly cross the line of the property boundary marker and head off into freedom. But what did happen after the Civil War? Following the brief period of Reconstruction, 1865 to 1877, where federal troops did occupy the South, and when it looked like the promise of America, of what this war stood for, could blossom, it all ended as the forces of white supremacy and discrimination resurged. The vast suppression and outright elimination of rights for Black and Brown Americans, Jim Crow, the utter subversion of the justice system against the stragglers of America, free reign of the KKK, not only for 100 years afterward, but its legacy structures like the Second Amendment, the filibuster, redlining, all defining our lives today. And the same thing as a Jew, I must recognize, happened with Nazism. Many of us have been raised on the stories and movies of the main actors being brought to justice at Nuremberg, or the assassination squads of the early Mossad. And I confess I missed the full picture. We realize now, and we're only beginning to really see it, let alone reckon with it, that this allowed us to blame the leadership, the specific Nazi soldiers or SS, the obviously pathological actors, when we realize now that mass populations of so-called bystanders, whom we have written off as being caught up as victims themselves, a story that they spun to their children and grandchildren and about themselves, were voluntarily treating themselves to the spectacle of the mass murder of Jews and others, treating themselves to Jews' jobs and property, as their neighbors were taken off to camps or to mass killing fields outside their own villages. And they participated in the dehumanization of Jews voluntarily. Like the cattle preserved by King Saul, America provided safe haven in our country for Nazis with scientific knowledge because it was to our benefit, and they were just scientists after all, and provided vast protections for Nazis remaining in Europe so they could serve as an intelligence network to combat the threat of the Soviet Union. We live in a time of staggering resurgence of neo-Nazism and white supremacy, and we wonder how we got here. And while aspects of what Babette is about to read certainly should trouble us and perhaps cause us to simply not accept them, we also need to open up to maybe the fact that Shabbat Sahur is a reminder for a lesson we have yet to learn. Babette, I'm going to put it on the screen. It'll just take a moment.
If I can just
Please
add to just a bit.
I would love it. Thank you, Babette.
Thank you, Nadav. And every year I read this Haftorah, and I find it extremely morally challenging. It is not only because of what Amalek did to the fragments on the way out from Egypt, and we're taking revenge. And it's a gruesome Haftarah, but also that Saul does not get a second chance. And I find that very difficult. Every year I think, why doesn't God give him a second chance? Because he just took the spoils, he took the good things. I think he saw the error of his ways and he didn't obey God, but maybe because of all the things that Nadav said, he felt it was the right thing to do. There's lots of explanations for all this, but it is very, very conflictual. I read it every year because it is my bat mitzvah parsha, and I did not get to read Torah back then, only Haftorah. So here is Haftarah Pashat Zachor from Samuel Aleph. Ko amar Adonai Tzvaot pakadati et asher asa Amalek liYisrael asher sam lo baderech baloto mimitzrayim אתה לך והכית את עמלק, והחרמתם את כל אשר לו, ולא תחמול עליו, והימתה מאיש עד אישה, מעולה וביד יונק, בישור ויד צב, מגמל ויד חמור. וישמע שאול את העם, ויפקדם בטלאים, 200,000 רגלי, ו10,000 את איש יהודה. ויבוא שאול עד עיר עמלק, וירף בנחל. ויאמר שאול אל הקני, לכו, סרו רדו מתוך עמלקי, פן אוסיף עמו, ואתה עשית חסד עם כל בני ישראל, ועלותם ממצרים, ויסר קני מתוך עמלק. ויך שאול את עמלק, מחבילה בואכה אשור, אשר על פני מצרים, יתפוס את הגג מלך עמלק חי, וכל העם החרים לפי חרב. ויחמול שאול והעם על הגג, במיטב הצאן, והבקר והמשניים, ועל הכרים ועל כל הטוב, ולא אבו חכרימם, בהו מלאכה, נמבזה ונמס אותה החרימו. ויהי דבר אדוני אל שמואל לאמור, ניחמתי כי המלכתי את שאול למלך, כי שב מאחריי, ואת דבריי לא הקים. ויחר לשמואל, ויזעק אל אדוני כל הלילה. וישכם שמואל לקראת שאול בבוקר, ויוגד לשמואל לאמור, בא שאול הר כרמלה, והנה מציב לו יד, ויסוב יעבור, וירד הגלגל. ויבוא שמואל אל שאול, ויאמר לו שאול, ברוך אתה לאדוני, הקימותי את דבר אדוני. ויאמר שמואל, ומה כל הצאן הזה באוזני, וכל הבקר אשר אנוכי שומע. ויאמר שאול, מעמלקי הביאון, אשר חמל העם, על מיטב הצאן והבקר, למען זבוח לאדוני אלוהיך, ואת היותר החרמנו. ויאמר שמואל שאול, ערב הגידה לך את אשר דיבר אדוני אלי הלילה, ויאמרו לו דבר. ויאמר שמואל, הלא אם קטון אתה בנך, ראש שבטי ישראל אתה, וימשכך אדוני למלך על ישראל, וישלח אדוני בדרך, ויאמר, לך והחרמת את החטאים, את עמלק, ונלחמת בו עד כלותם אותם. ולמה לא שמעת בקול אדוני, ותת את השלל, ותעש הרע בעיני אדוני. ויאמר שאול אל שמואל, אשר שמעתי בקול אדוני, ולך בדרך אשר שלחני אדוני, ואביא את אגג מלך עמלק, ואת עמלק החרמתי, ויקח מהשלל צאן ובקר ראשית החרם, לזבוח לאדוני אלוהיך בגלגל. ויאמר שמואל החפץ לאדוני בעולות וצבחים, כי ישמוע בקול אדוני, הנה שמוע מזבח טוב, להקשיב מחיל אבלים, כי חטא קסם מרי, ואבן וטרפים הבצר, ינמסת את דבר אדוני, וימסך ממלך. ויאמר שאול שמואל, חטאתי, כי עברתי את פי אדוני ואת דבריך, כי יראתי את העם ואשמע בקולם, ואתה שנא את חטאתי, ושוב עמי ואשתחווה לאדוני. ויאמר שמואל לשאול, לא אשוב עמך, כי מאסת את דבר אדוני, וימסך אדוני מהיות מלך על ישראל. ויסוב שמואל ללכת, ויחזק בכנף מעילו, ויקרא. ויאמר אליו שמואל, קרא אדוני את ממלכות ישראל מעליך היום, ונתנה לרעך הטוב ממך, וגם נצח ישראל לא ישקר ולא ינחם, כי לא אדם הוא להנחם. ויאמר חטאתי אתה כבנינה נגד זקני עמי ונגד ישראל, ושוב עמי והשתחוויתי לאדוני אלוהיך. וישב שמואל אחרי שאול, וישתחו שאול לאדוני. ויאמר שמואל, הגישו אלי את אגג מלך עמלק, וילך אליו אגג מעדנות. ויאמר אגג, אכן שר מר המוות. ויאמר שמואל, כאשר שכלה נשים חרבך, כן תשכל מנשים עמך. וישסף שמואל את אגג לפני אדוני בגלגל. וילך שמואל הרמתה, ושאול עלה אל ביתו גבעת שאול.
Yeshar Kochek Babet. We are so happy to have you read Haftarah and Torah and to share your words of wisdom. Thanks so much. As we continue with the service, I'm going to let you in on a secret. Don't tell Neil I told you. As we've been writing lyrics for Purim for Thursday night, so I write these rhymes, these lyrics, and they have to, we each have a veto. So I'll tell you one I lost on and one I won on. So one is, where Ahasuerus is reading the annals and he discovers that Mordechai should be honored, and that's what he does with his insomnia. So I had a rhyme about annals, and Neil, and maybe it's because he's a physician, but he just felt like we couldn't use the word annal in a rhyme. And so I lost on the word annals. It will not be in the songs on Thursday night. But what I won on is the word Agagite. I said, if I'm losing on the word annal, then I have a rhyme for Agagite. And he said, nothing rhymes with Agagite, but I made it work. So you'll see, you have to come and listen on Thursday night. With that, as we continue the service, I'm going to share my Devar Torah right now, and we'll have the Kaddish to Rabbanan, and then continue with the prayers for America and Israel, and continuing. I know I've been a little bit heavy with the two comments I've made so far for Shabbat Zachor, but I just want to talk now, not so heavy, about the Kiruvim, the cherubim that we heard described in the chapter we read in the Shlish today, and what they were. So today we have the images of Kiruvim, whatever they are, cherubs, embroidered on the Ark curtain. And in Parashat Tetzaveh, they'll be made of hammered gold and placed, on top of the Ark of the Covenant. And remember that it is from in between the Kiruvim that God speaks, because God speaks from above the Ark, from in between them. Great for a science fiction movie. And they guard, as well as I mentioned, the Garden of Eden. And in the first temple, the Temple of Solomon, these 10-cubit high figures are placed in front of the Ark, and you pass by them. So what do they look like? We don't have any exact images of them. You probably know that in Midrashic folk etymology, not real etymology, just straight up fun Midrash, Rabbi Abahu says that, well, the form keruv sounds like kiravya, like a young child. And hence we get the depiction in art and literature of the cherubim as baby angels. It could also be that he's writing in the time of the early church, and so we don't know which came first, the chicken or the egg, the cute little baby Cupid cherub, or already images of those from Cupid, from Hellenism, or from early Christianity, or whether they got it from us. Talmudic legend also has it, and this is a widespread Talmudic legend, that one was male and one was female, referring back to the original construction of the human as both Zachar Unekeva, masculine and feminine, and then separated along the middle tsela, the side. And today we read that important reference of the tsela of the tabernacle as the side of the tabernacle, which is the proof text used for the rabbi's explanation of chapters 1 and 2 of Genesis. And therefore, when the curtain was pulled away, according to Talmudic legend, people would actually see the male and the female cherub sculptures engaged in an act of sexual congress. The Talmud records also that the Moabites would make fun of us because we, supposedly the ones who are abstract monotheists, actually have images right in the Holy of Holies of two creatures engaging in sex. Other Jewish philosophers defend it by saying they had to have two, because if they only had one, people would think that was an image of God. Basically, we don't really know exactly why they're there and how they looked. In Samuel and in Psalms, God is depicted as riding on them, which is something that we see in other ancient Near Eastern cultures. Radak, the medieval commentators, the Radak and the Rabag, almost agree with Abahu, but see them as human adults with wings, like the modern images in films of angels, and which can be seen in medieval Jewish manuscripts. Some modern scholars actually agree with this view, since it agrees with other ancient Near Eastern iconography of a human with wings. And some modern scholars agree with this view. There's Professor Bar Ilan that says it's right, based on the fact that the wingspan is the height and the wingspan are identical. And they say that it is only a human rather than a bird or a lion that would have the proper proportions to make that so. Rashbam and Chizkuni see them as birds. I mean, literally as like these beautiful birds alighting on top of the ark. And some scholars agree because they see them like, you know, when you're looking at hieroglyphics and you see those two Egyptian birds, like one facing the other as kind of decoration, they see them as that, as the two birds facing each other. And this is likely the basis of the bird Haggadah, the theme of bird imagery. Other of the medieval rabbis saw the cherubim as angels in the image of oxen, because in Akkadian sculpture, we see these big oxen with wings. The biggest proponent of, and we also see reference like this in Ezekiel, the biggest rabbi proponent of the ox with wings view is the famous commentator, the Bechor Shor, who I quoted several times this past year. And we don't know if it's related, his view, to the fact that his epithet, the Bechor Shor, actually means firstborn ox. So maybe it has to do with the fact that he saw it as an ox with wings. Still other scholars say there's always the griffin hypothesis, that they were griffins, very common at the time in Near Eastern iconography. An eagle-headed lion is a griffin. Also, fans of Harry Potter tend to support this view. Griffins were well established after all, and God took us out of Egypt on eagle's wings, and our souls are protected under the wings of God's presence. And then you have the Lion of Judah. And so we have the eagle, the griffin hypothesis. Many scholars consider the cherubim as standard sphinxes, a lion with a human head. But then we still have the problem with all of these, of Ezekiel's vision, where Ezekiel says it has 4 faces, one representing each facet of the animal world: an ox face for domesticated animals, a lion face for wild animals, an eagle face for the birds of the sky, and a human face as well. Some of the rabbis say this, let's get out of this problem because you're all being too specific. Yehuda Halevi suggested that the word simply means mixed, similar to the word eruv, and so that it means hybrid. So like any hybrid creature would count. So everybody's right. Other rabbis say the word keruv really is a generic term for the word image. So it just means there are 2 images, and all variations of images could be versions of cherubim. So we're not exactly sure of the etymology. Maybe someone like me suggests, does it mean anything that it's the word Baruch spelled backwards? But I'll finish with, let's focus for a moment on the other side of the spectrum, which is Maimonides. What is an angel? Maimonides asks. Without getting too far into exactly what it looked like, he rates the keruv as number 9 on the scale of angels. So maybe someone would say, well, what is an angel to Maimonides? For Maimonides, an angel is an extension of God in this world. It's God's essence put forth. And let me see if I can read you a little bit. And so each of the angels is a specific set of forces of God that operate in this world. He writes the following. The Talmudic and biblical references to angels are actually allusions to the various laws of nature. They are principles by which the physical universe operates. For all forces are angels. How blind, how perniciously blind are the naive. If you told someone who purports to be a sage of Israel that the deity sends an angel who enters a woman's womb and there forms an embryo, he would say that's a miracle and accept it as a mark of the majesty and power of the deity, despite the fact that he believes an angel to be a body of fire 1/3 the size of an entire world. All this, he says, well, it's all possible for God. But if you tell him that God placed in the sperm the power of forming and demarcating these organs and in the ovum, and that this is the angel, and that all forms are produced by God, that here is the angel, the vice regent of the world constantly mentioned by the sages, this rabbi will recoil. and say that you're completely wrong. For the naive person does not understand that the true majesty and power are in the bringing into being of forces which are active in a thing, although they cannot be perceived by the senses. Thus the sages reveal to the aware that the imaginative faculty is also called an angel. The mind is a keruv. How beautiful this will appear to the sophisticated mind, but how disturbing to the primitive. So I'd like to give one example of defending Maimonides on how to see in the world what an angel in Maimonides' definition could be. Back when I was in college, I had a friend, the friend who died, I mentioned before Yizkor at a High Holy Day service. And when we were at college together, she's the one who got me all excited about Lewis Thomas, and she was a biology major and just really a special kind of mind, in some ways, too good for this earth. And one day she was going for a walk, true story, back at college, and she noticed something which she ended up writing it up into a paper and publishing. She noticed she was watching ants on a tree, and she surmised that the ants and the tree had a symbiotic relationship. She surmised that the ant was not a parasite and the tree a host, nor that they were coincidentally geolocal, but rather, and her surmise turned out to be correct, that some arrangement had been made by these ants and these trees a long time ago, that something that the tree provided, the ant would rely on, and a service that the tree needed, the ant would provide. And unlike a parasite-host relationship, in a symbiotic relationship, it's covenantal. And it could well mean that when the tree dies, the ants can't survive because they no longer have the special thing they need from the tree. And should the ants die, the tree would get sick and become diseased because it no longer has the protection of the special thing that the ant is doing for it. Here we have two things coming together to make a system to sustain each other. One of the angels is Refuah, or Raphael, the angel of God, the angel of health. And some people have asked me, are we wishing for an angel to visit the people that we're praying for? And like Maimonides says, sort of regardless of whether an angel is half the size of the world, or it's a cherub, or it's a sphinx, it arrives and it heals the person externally, in a sense. But do we reflect enough on, like the tree and the ant, is the body a connection of symbiotic relationships that make like an ecosystem? And what may be beautiful about the nature of our bodies and other animal bodies and ecosystems themselves is that they are self-healing. They heal themselves. They have the pattern for healing, as Maimonides would say. They have the active intellect of the healing process unfolding within them. We rely on this every time I throw something out. When I throw something out, I basically say, I know it's not completely biodegradable, but I'm hoping the ecosystem can handle that. And in time, somehow this earth will balance itself and it can handle that piece of plastic, or it can handle the pollution I'm making. Somehow a tree is gonna suck up that carbon dioxide and we'll all be in good shape. So we're always relying on that the systems we live in basically search for equilibrium and have the parts in them compensate for changes so that they can find ways to heal. The different parts of them can find a way to work together so healing takes place. So when I'm wishing for healing, I'm enlightening myself to the fact in a Maimonidean way that in a way bodies are healing themselves. And what doctors, and Maimonides of course was a doctor, what they're trying to do is kickstart the immune process. Often for those who suffer from immune challenges, it's actually that the body is overacting in its health intellect and creating problems. And sometimes it's underacting. But in many ways, it's not always a medicine that is curing. It's a medicine that is kickstarting and helping our body to heal itself. So on this day of the Cheruvim, I ask us to deepen our sense of God's presence in this world, not always as external objects or invisible things. And so it doesn't matter if the Cheruvim have wings or they're griffins or they're Ezekiel's four-faced angels. But let us see God's presence in this world as the forces that are happening around us and that we are privileged to be a part of. They penetrate us, they penetrate the earth. And when we acknowledge them, understand them, and support them, we are supporting God's work in this world. Shabbat Shalom. We turn to Amanda and actually before we turn to Amanda, I'm going to do the Kaddish Rabbanan for having done some learning from the rabbis and from Torah. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, v'yalma divra kirutei v'yamlich malchutei, v'chayechon uv'yomechon uv'chayei dechol beit Yisrael, ba'agala uv'izman kari v'imru amen. Yehe shmei Rabbah mevarach v'olam olam me'al maya. Yibarach v'yishtabach v'yipa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal, shmei dekudashah brichu. Le'ela min kol berchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, ta'amiran v'alma v'imru amen. Al Yisrael v'al Rabbanan v'al Tamidehon, v'al kol Tamidehon, v'al kol man da'askim ba'oraita, Divya Trahadin v'di b'chol atar v'atar. Yehe lehon u'lechon shlama rabba china v'chista v'rachamin v'chayin arichin u'mizona revicha for kana min kodam avahon di v'ishmaya v'imru amen. Yehe shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim tovim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav hu b'rachamav ya'aseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. May the study of rabbinic and biblical texts lead us to channel compassion into this world and bring a Chaim Tovim, a good life for all the people of Israel and all the earth's dwellers. Turn to the prayer for our country, Amanda, I'm going to put you right on.
Awesome. Shabbat Shalom, everybody. So I'm going to be reading the prayer for our country by Rabbi Ayelet Cohen. Our God and God of our ancestors, bless this country and all who dwell within it. Help us to experience the blessings of our lives and circumstances, to be vigilant, compassionate, and brave. Strengthen us when we are afraid. Help us to channel our anger so that it motivates us to action. Help us to feel our fear so that we do not become numb. Help us to be generous with others so that we raise each other up. Help us to be humble in our fear, knowing that as vulnerable as we feel, there are those at greater risk, and that it is our holy work to stand with them. Help us to taste the sweetness of liberty, to not take for granted the freedoms won in generations past or in recent days, to heal and nourish our democracy, that it may be like a tree planted by the water whose roots reach down to the stream. It need not fear drought when it comes, its leaves are always green. Source of all life, guide our leaders with righteousness. Strengthen their hearts, but keep them from hardening, that they may use their influence and authority to speak truth and act for justice. May all who dwell in this country share in its bounty, enjoy its freedoms, and be protected by its laws. May this nation use its power and wealth to be a voice for justice, peace, and equality for all who dwell on earth. May we be strong and have courage to be bold in our action and deep in our compassion, to discern when we must listen and when we must act, to uproot bigotry, intolerance, misogyny, racism, discrimination, and violence in all its forms, to celebrate the many faces of God reflected in the wondrous diversity of humanity, to welcome the stranger and the immigrant, and to honor the gifts of those who seek refuge and possibility here, as they have since before this nation was born. Let justice well up like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream.
Amen. Shabbat Shalom. The prayer for the state of Israel.
Can you highlight Ron's screen?
Oh, sure. Sorry. Thank you, Ron. There we go.
I want to say this in memory of my Zaidi, Shmuel Ber Ben Harav Shlomo Nosson V'Chaya Tova, whose yahrzeit is Purim. אבינו שבשמיים, צור ישראל וגואלו, ברך את מדינת ישראל ראשית צמיחת גאולתנו, הגן עליה בעברת חסדך, ופרוס עליה סוכת שלומך, ושלח אורך ועמיתך לראשיה, שריה ויועציה, ותקנן בעצה טובה מלפניך. חזק את ידי מגיני ארץ קודשנו, והנחילם אלוהינו ישוע, ועטר את ניצחון תעטרם, ונתת שלום בארץ ושמחת עולם ליושביה, ונאמר אמן.
Amen.
Avinu Shabashamayim, rock and redeemer of the people Israel, bless the state of Israel with its promise of redemption. Shield it with your love. Spread over it the shelter of your peace. Guide its leaders and advisors with your light and your truth. Help them with your good counsel. Strengthen the hands of those who defend our holy land. Deliver them. Crown their efforts with triumph. Bless the land with peace and its inhabitants with lasting joy. And let us say amen.
Amen. And the prayer for peace.
So I just want to ask for a small moment of a footnote after I read this. And thanks, Amanda, for inspiring me with a great idea. It's a little different. May the Lord bless his people with peace and bring peace to us and to all his people. Hear our prayer for peace within ourselves, within our communities, within our nation, and with all the peoples of the world. A just peace includes civil and political rights. It must encompass economic, security, and opportunity. For true peace is not just freedom from fear, but freedom from want. Let us reach for the world that ought to be, the spark of the divine that still stirs within each of our souls. Amen. So my footnote includes that I was looking for something a little bit different for the prayer for peace. And I came upon, I had a couple work meetings and I'm sure people saw my tabs that said Hebrew prayer for peace. So that's okay. So I was looking for something a little more interesting, a little different, a little more robust. And I found two people who I admire, and I grabbed a little bit from each one of their speeches. One was Rabbi Goldstein from San Diego, and I grabbed a little bit of his, and the other was from Obama's speech when he was nominated for his Nobel Prize for Peace. So I thought they fit kind of like puzzles, just sort of meshed really well together and very appropriate for right now.
Rachel, thank you so much. And thank you so much for explaining it. What dare I say, it sounds like a beautiful cherub, a wonderful hybrid of two things put together to make a wonderful guardian of Torah.
Well, words are, as writers know, words are meant to be shared. So I feel that those words were out there meant to be shared and shared with the community.
We're glad you shared them with us.
Thank you.
Page 155 for Musaf, where we are all standing at some point during the page so that we're ready to head into the next page standing. And Deborah, I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself.
Sorry, I thought I had.
No, it's okay.
Yitgadal v'yitgadash shemei Rabba v'amad yivrach yirtei v'yamlich malchutei v'chayechon v'yomechon v'chayedecho beit Yisrael v'agala v'zman kariv v'yimeru amen Yehei shmei Rabba mevorach Le'olam lo me'omaya yitbarach Yitbarach, V'yishtabach, V'yitpa'ar, V'yitramam, V'yitnaseh, V'yithadar, V'yitalev, V'yitalal, Shemei Kedusha, B'richu, Le'elam, Min Kol Birchata, V'shirata, Tushbechata, V'nechemata, Damiran Yama, V'yimeru, Amen. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu v'Elohei Avotenu, Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol, Hagibor v'Hanora, El Elyon Gomel Chasadim Tovim, V'Konei Hakol, Zocher Chazdei Avod, Umevi Goel Livnei Bnehem, Leman Shemo B'Ahava, Melech Ozer Upokedu Moshiach Umagen, Baruch Atah Adonai, Magen Avraham Upoked Sarah, Atah Gibor Le'alam Adonai, Mechayem Metim Atah Rav Lehoshia, Mashiv Haruach Umarid Hagasham, Mechayel Chayim Bechesed, Mechayem Metim Berachamim Rabim, Somech Loflim Verofei Cholim, Umatir Asurim, Umekayim Emunato Lishenei Afar, Michamocha Ba'al Gevurot, Umidom Elach, Melech Memid Umechayeh, Umatzmiach Yeshua, V'ne'emar Natala Hachayot Metim, Baruch Atah Adonai, Mechayeh HaMetim, Atah Kadosh V'Shimcha Kadosh, Kadoshim B'chol Yom, Yahalalucha Selah, Baruch Atah Adonai Ha'el HaKadosh.
For those who are still davening, please continue as the rest of us are on page 181.
Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabba, Yamad yivrach yirutei, v'yamitmachutei b'chayechonu, v'yamechonu v'chayedecho be'Yisrael, v'agolav izman kari v'yamaru, Yehei shmei Rabba mevorach, v'olam me'omaya yitbarach, יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי לקודשה בריחו לעלמים כל ברכתה ושירתה תשבחתה ונחמתה דאמירן ביומה ויאמרו תתקבל צלותהון ובאותהון דכל ישראל קדם ובהון דבישמיה ויאמרו אמן.
אמן.
יהי שלמה רבה מן שמיה וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ויאמרו
אמן.
עושה שלום במרמיו הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ויאמרו אמן.
En Kelohenu.
En Kelohenu, en Kadonenu, en Kemalkenu, en Kemoshienu, mi Elohenu, mi Kadonenu, mi Kemalkenu, mi Kemoshienu. Del Elohenu, no del Adonenu, no del Malkenu, no del Moshienu. Baruch Elohenu, Baruch Adonenu, Baruch Malkeinu, Baruch Moshienu. Atahu Eloheinu, Atahu Adonenu, Atahu Malkeinu, Atahu Moshienu, Atahu Shiftiru Avotenu, Lefanecha et Ketoret Hasamim. Aleinu leshabeach ladon hakol, latet gedula yotzer breshit, shelo asanu kigoye haratzot, velo samanu kimishbechot hadama, shelo sam chelkenu kahem, vigor aleinu kircho hamonam, va'anachnu korim, umishtachavim, Umodim lifnei melech malchei hamlachim hakadosh baruch hu shehu noteh shamayim v'yoset aretz u'masher yikaro b'shamayim mimah u'shchinatu zo b'gavei meromim hu Eloheinu ein od emet malkeinu efesu ato Kakatu b'torato v'yadata hayom v'hashevota elevavecha ki Adonai hu ha'Elohim v'shamayim mimal v'al haaretz mitachat ein od. Kakatu b'toratecha, Adonai imloch le'olam va'ed, v'ne'emar v'haya Adonai le'melech al kol ha'aretz, v'yom hahu, yiyeh Adonai echad, u'shemo echad.
You may be seated as we continue on page 1, except for those, you can be seated temporarily. We have the Mourner's Kaddish on page 184, and I'm sharing the Yortzites at this time. Beth Israel congregation remembers today the Yortzites of Rebecca Alpern, Paul Becker, Paul William Buckwalter, Goldie Chudikoff, Muriel Cohen, Helen Grossman Cohen, Philip Elving, Martin Feinblatt, Vivian Filk, Rosalind Frey, Mushulam Gaffney, Etta Galler, George Garville, Jack Goldman, Ben Goldman, Shale Gonick, Ruth Gubitz, Fanny Haber, Mildred Hafter, Thomas Henry IV, Sarah Hymans, Minnie Ingber, Hella Case, Lorene Canner, Samuel Kotlicki, Samuel Lasky, Geraldine Lauder, Max Lichter, Lillian Lipning Cohen, Sylvia Meisel, Arthur Mendel, Fred Metter, Esther Milkova, Rose Moscow, Abe Muchnick, Sarah Neiman, Gertrude Perlova, Mary Beimel Pollack, Riva Polsky, Elaine Rosen-Rashes, Joseph Rosenthal, Jack Roth, Alexander Rothberg, Edward Rothberg, Rosella Routman, Sarah Rachel Schindler, Milton Solins, Harry Spoon, Robert Strasberg, Libby Sturman, Alice Warshaw, Daniel Wayne, Mary Wiesenthal, Joyce Wodka, Jenny Wopinski, Phyllis Young, Charles Zimmerman, Ella Zwerdling, and Oziah Swerdling. So we continue to say Kaddish for Barry Polsky, Clarice Malach, Anita Strasberg, Vivian Lichter, Ron Serwin, Bruce Serwin, Ron Good, Greg Schaefer, Jack Krasinski, Ethel Kellen, Maxine Feig, Mary Jane Northrup, Ann Gare, Daniel Greenberg, Michael Perlman, Homer Leroy Thomas, Eli Bakken, Gloria Greenfield, Dr. Stanley Pinsky, Roberta Kirshner, Milt Rockman, Mitchell Kramer, Darwin Bender, Erwin Pollack, Aryeh Greenberg, Harvey Danowitz, Millie Dietrich, Robert Morris, Lorraine Rothschild, Michael Zeller, Leslie Robert Axelrod, and Andrew Diamond. Warner's Kaddish 184. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, v'alma divra pirutei v'alma
Israel,
Agala Vizman Kari,
Amen.
Yehi Shmei Rabba Mevaram Me'amaya, Yiparach Shabbat Yitadar Yitaleh Yitalal Shmei Dikudashah Le'elam Tushbechata B'nechamata Amiram V'Amah Yehi Shmama Rabba Shemaim Aleinu V'Alko Yisrael
Amen.
Oseh Shalom B'Ramav Yaseh Shalom Aleinu V'Alko Yisrael V'Imru Amen. May their memories continue to bring blessings to this world. I'm going to share a few announcements and then we'll have Adon Olam. I didn't clear this with Deborah, but Ruben, I see that you're on. Are you willing to have your family do Adon Olam for us as you did last night? You guys were really, really, really good. So Ruben, just say yes or not today.
Yes.
Okay, so you'll be on a little bit. You have time to get the mishpacha, get the choir together.
Yes.
Okay, so in a few minutes we'll have you guys on for the Adon Olam. But for now, a few notes that what's coming up. After services today, I'll be teaching a lunch and learn where you provide the lunch and we provide the learn together. And it'll occur, I want to, let's see, figure we'll probably start around 5 minutes to 12. That's my guess. So you can leave your computer on or your tablet on and just go get yourself a cup of tea or a sandwich or whatever it is that suits you. And then we'll come together and we'll do some learning. So I've already sent out the content of it. Today we'll talk about musical instruments on Shabbat and the third Saturday of each month for the next several months, for the spring, you call this the spring? Well, we're getting some sun. For the end of the winter, it's about to end, and the spring will be the third Saturday of the month. We'll do a little bit of learning about Jewish law after services. I hope you'll join us. And even if you have your screen off and you're enjoying it, it will not be by YouTube. It will only be by Zoom. And so I hope you'll join me. Tomorrow, I want to let you know about the Federation fundraiser. If you haven't had the opportunity to hear Ari Axelrod, and this time also with Tova Feldschuh doing her thing, it's an amazing opportunity. There's still, because they didn't have to book everything ahead of time, you are still able to sign up after Shabbat in time for tomorrow evening's Federation's big event cabaret. So Lynn and I are looking forward to it. I hope you'll join us, and I hope you'll find a way to sign up if you haven't already. And as I said last night, you can enjoy Ari Axelrod in a whole nother level than you enjoyed him before. And but that it's just an amazingly, it's exactly what we need at this time. So that's the Federation main event tomorrow. In addition, just remember that we, Beth Israel staff, are working from home now, so don't expect us to be in the building. And if there's something that you need, you can arrange with Sam to find a time where such things can happen. Remember, TorahReaders.net is there for signing up for participation in the service. In addition, remember Intro to Judaism for those who are coming is tomorrow with me at 1 p.m. The next day, Monday, Talmud study with Rabbi Daberson at 3:30 p.m. On February 24th, the day before Erev Purim, we have the Bible players back to do Esther to the Rescue, and be basically for elementary school children, a wonderful program by Zoom that they really do expertly. That's February 24th. On Thursday, we're at Erev Purim and Leil Purim. And we have, in addition to Pirkei Avot with Rabbi Daberson at 5, there's a little bit of a Zoom carnival for sort of younger elementary kids. So we have a link to the Purim Carnival by breakout rooms. We'll see how that works. It's worth a try. Basically, pre-K through 4th or 5th grade are invited to participate. That's at 6 p.m. on Erev Purim. And then at 6:30 p.m., not by Zoom, but by YouTube. In the same way that we did High Holidays, I invite you to join Neil and me, and this time with a live band, for a musical Purim. We'll have Rabbi Daberson leading the way with the Megillah reading, and I'll pick up some of the slack at the end. So dress up, get yourself a drink, find yourself on the lazy boy, the most comfortable chair you have, get out a grogger and a noisemaker, put it on the largest TV you have, crank up the sound, and enjoy wonderful music and celebration. That is what we have to do, but it's a way of being together and bringing some joy into our lives. So remember to check the Beth Israel channel on YouTube. Again, that's not by Zoom. Thursday night, the adult service, which is also kid-friendly, will be a musical celebratory Megillah reading and service by YouTube. Friday morning, we'll have a Zoom Shacharit service with Megillah chapters read again, and that'll be Friday morning. And we invite you to join us for all the festivities and follow the announcements that we send out for Purim this week, so we can bring a little fun into our lives at a very difficult time. With that, Deborah, do you have anything to add at this time?
No.
All right, and so thank you for thank you for giving away Adon Olam for now. I'm going to say goodbye to the people on YouTube. So